Hello and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on trusted flaggers and the process now formalized under the DSA. We had a very interesting session earlier that discussed the comparison between the Online Services Act in the UK and the Digital Services Act generally within the EU. And now we will be diving into one specific article under the DSA, Article 22, which is formalizing the trusted flagger process within the European Union. My name is Abby Roberts, and I'm a project manager with InHope, and I will be moderating this panel as well as representing InHope and the network of hotlines as they explore the new role that they are hoping to achieve under the DSA. So to my left, I have Daniela Maciuska from Google, and then Benoit Luttrell from ARCOM, who will be representing their organizations as the trifecta of players under the Trusted Flaggers process of the Trusted Flagger, the platform, and the regulatory body who will be serving as the Digital Services Coordinator within France. So I think to start us off, if we could go down the line and give a background on our organizations, our roles, and then discuss a little bit about why we are willing to dedicate an hour of our time and a week or two of preparation to discussing one specific article under the DSA and why it's relevant for everyone in this room going forward. So Daniela, if you could start us off.
Sure, and I will also say thank you so much, Abby, because we had a third panelist up until yesterday, and their flights were cancelled. And so I think, Abby, you're right now playing moderator and panelist. So she'll be jumping seats.
Metaphorically.
So I'm Daniela Matuszka. I work at Google. I've been at Google for about 10 years. I'm currently on their partnerships team, working on both our voluntary priority flagger program and now with the DSA, the Trusted Flagger program. Before that, I was working in Dublin on illegal content requests. Started off in Google with the right to be forgotten, if anyone still remembers that. And at that point, trust and safety wasn't a word that really existed. And then moved out to Singapore and was working on illegal content requests for Australia, New Zealand, India, Pakistan, all countries with very interesting individual content moderation regimes. And so Google has a number of products that are in scope of the DSA. Some of our online platforms are classified as VLOPs. And so because of that, those products fall in scope of Article 22. And so I'll be talking today a bit more about how we plan to comply with Article 22 and also the differences and similarities between that and our priority flagger program.
Hello, so my name is Benoit Luttrell. I'm board member of ARCOM. ARCOM is soon to be the Digital Service Coordinator for France. As we discussed, the Parliament is trying to reconcile the version of the law that was voted by the upper house and lower house, but one thing on which we agree is that we should be the Digital Service Coordinator. And within ARCOM, we have a 9-person board. I'm one of the board members, and we have a portfolio where we focus more on. My focus is implementing the DSA. So I like all the articles of the DSA, but especially 22.
Thank you so much. And then for a little bit of context on InHope, for those of you that aren't familiar, InHope is the network of internet hotlines that accepts and processes reports of child sexual abuse material found online and reported by members of the public. We are a global organization. We represent 55 hotlines in 51 member countries around the world. However, we do have 29 member hotlines that operate in EU states. And member hotlines within the EU and outside of the EU have participated for many, many years now in pre-DSA trusted flagger programs that have been set up by a variety of platforms around the world to report and prioritize content found on their services. So InHope member hotlines before the DSA have been involved in this process, and now as the InHope network has been mentioned within the preamble of the DSA as a body of organizations who could be potential trusted flaggers, we are now turning our sights towards how to best prepare for actually what has already been implemented with February 15th deadline of implementation of the DSA, we are now preparing for supporting member hotlines and becoming trusted flaggers within the EU and what that'll mean for our processes and capacity as a network going forward. So before we dive into the minutiae of trusted flaggers under the DSA in Article 22, I think we should talk a little bit about our experiences before the DSA even came into place with these trusted flagging or priority flagging or prioritized reports by industry partners and these systems that were set up before the DSA, and what our plans for, what the lessons we learned from these processes before the DSA, and what it will look like going forward with both of these systems in place with the DSA being implemented. So Daniela, if you could start us off with the Google perspective on this.
Sure. So Google has a pretty long history of working with external entities on digital safety. We started the YouTube, then called Trusted Flagger Program, now called Priority Flagger Program, in 2012, so about 12 years ago. That dealt with YouTube community guidelines and worked with experts in various content policy issues. So CSAM, we're working with the In Hope Network and a number of different child safety entities, violent extremism, hate speech, and that is a global program that works with generally entities like NGOs, government associations, and we have eligibility criteria such as they need to have expertise in that particular area, they need to have capacity to flag content to us, they should be willing to collaborate, to talk to us. There's an opportunity to share feedback on our policies, as well as send us in content, have that direct line to us, and have those flags prioritized for review. And we also look for objectivity in as much as possible, representation of collective interests, and also respect for human rights, especially freedom of expression rights. One thing I will say about the program, and this will be similar for DSA, is that we don't automatically remove content. We process flags in the same way as we would through our other product policy intake channels. And so we can push back on those flags as well as remove that content. We may ask for more information. It's the standard content moderation process. And one distinction with the DSA Trusted Flaggers is that, as I mentioned, the Priority Flagger Program is in regard to community guideline content or content under our content policies. So since the founding of the YouTube program, we've expanded the program slowly to other products and policies and brought on more flaggers, really depending on need. I would say that YouTube is our most advanced program. But we're looking forward to bringing a lot of the learnings that we've had from those programs over to the DSA Trusted Flagger program once they start to be nominated, which we're hoping will be soon.
Ideally so. And so the role of the regulator is going to be a little bit different than the platform and the Trusted Flagger itself. But Benoit, if you could comment a little bit on ARCOM's previous experience with this area of work and how it's going to inform ARCOM's plans for the implementation.
Yes, thank you. I guess what Daniela said is really important because we have an issue with the word. Trusted flaggers existed before the DSA. And so you have, I don't know how to say it, previous trusted flaggers and DSA approved or DSA certified trusted flaggers. And the question is, how do we switch from one regime to the other? And how do we make sure that we create value? Because that's the idea. First, we have to recognize that trusted flaggers were invented by the biggest platform, and the idea is really interesting, has created a lot of value, and there is a long history dating back from the limited liability regime of the e-commerce directive, Section 230 in the US, saying which leaves a void which has to be filled. There is a need to organize something. So the idea is that you have an intermediary which is recognized for the value, for the quality of the signaling it's sending that deserve to be treated in priority is a good idea, and that's why it was recognized by the co-legislator in the DSA, saying how can we bring this system at a higher level, more efficient, more powerful, so it's a Olympic, higher, faster, etc. So it's tricky because we have this handover, which is we have to implement and to make sure that we really create value. We are learning because it's also a question for us. How do you add value by adding an ingredient, a regulator, in between, which was not there? If you are pessimistic, you would say we are just going to add administrative burden. We don't want that. So it's a question, where do we add value? And I think that we'll be adding value if we manage to find our place in between, to organize an adversarial discussion to take place between both parties, because in some cases, the limit to go even higher in creating value was that the discussion was missing a third party in between to act as an adjudicator, say to one party, maybe recognize that your signaling is not always as good as you mention it, or on the other side, recognize that no, you are not treating it correctly, or that suddenly, for whatever reason, your teams have disappeared and that your performance is going down very fast. This being said, we have realized over time, because what we have been doing over the last year is learning, going through a learning curve. We have to go through a learning curve. We have to discuss with everybody, and it's normal. So the way I'm going to present it, it's different from what I did 6 months ago. Now I fully recognize that we have two categories of trusted flaggers. One dealing with individuals, protecting individuals that are at risk of being victim of hate speech, of online harassment, etc. That's the one which typically, I guess, in Europe you are dealing with. And there is a second family, which are intellectual property right holders. And they are also, their IP is at risk, but they are clearly in different family. And we are learning that through going through the discussion, which are really useful, which is year one of the DSA implementation. Learning to work together and learning where we can add value, how we can add value. So I think that's exactly what we are doing as we speak. And we are doing it as a DSC, so on a national member state level. And we are doing it at an EU level together, all the DSC together with the EU Commission, to make sure that we are gradually working, building a shared vision that will really allow us to bring more value to everybody in this system. This is what I can say maybe as an introduction.
Yeah, fantastic. And then a little bit on the INHOPE end, we have quite the spectrum of previous experiences with priority flagging and trusted flagging programs prior to the DSA. Hotline members have all, by mandate, been built to be these sort of flaggers of illegal content found online, particularly CSAM. And as the INHOPE Secretariat, one of our main goals is working with technology platforms and industry partners to support hotlines in establishing these contacts with platforms to better remove this content from the internet. So for all of our partnerships with the industry partners, both in this room and around the world, there have been multiple programs set up and honed with these relationships with hotlines and platforms. Individualized contacts established for these programs and feedback loops generated over the past few years to inform on how to better report on content, flag content, and then the feedback from platforms to hotlines of what this process looked like. I think we've worked to support hotlines to participate in 5 or 6 different programs over the past decade and a half since the conception of this initiative, and these will continue alongside our focus on the formalization of the process under the DSA. So now that we have met the February deadline of implementation of the DSA, we recognize that even though the deadline has passed, there is still a variety of maturity in the different member states of the implementation progress of both establishing the digital services coordinators to identifying the guidelines and requirements for becoming trusted flaggers to even nominating or asking for applications for trusted flaggers to apply for this process. So if we could start with Benoit, if you could run us through the current status in France of implementation of the DSA related to trusted flagging.
So at this point, I guess we could open the process for trusted flaggers to apply to officially be recognized by ARCOM, unless we don't have the law. So legally, we don't exist yet as a digital service coordinator. It's important. So I guess on that one, we are waiting on our parliament to finally approve the law and for the law to be published. But this being said, we have already had several meetings with organization, existing trusted flaggers, pre-DSA, NGOs interested to join the system, bodies of on the government side interesting to understand whether it could bring value to what they are doing, and with many people, so it's really useful, and we are realizing that the potential of the instrument is really, really high. So we think we have not opened the process, but we have the feeling that we are already delivering some value. Second thing that I've been doing, and I've been mentioning it in other conferences, is that, of course, initially, we all took the DSA and we took our legal glasses, saying, okay, let's read the DSA. Do we understand how it works from a legal point of view? And then we changed glasses and we took economist glasses. Say, how do we lead this thing from an economist point of view? And say, oh, it's interesting. A trusted flagger is a cost center. There's no revenue. So you have an issue. How do you fund the trusted flaggers? And you have no solution in the DSA. The DSA is not a budgetary law. And at some point, we have to put it in the public debate because we have to check that the trusted flagger exists. We are convinced they add value, that they are independent, but they need financing to exist. So how do we build this financing? And there is only 3 ways to finance a body like a trusted flagger: public money, private money, I suspect from the platform, and money from the civil society, foundation, whatever. And at some point, we'll have to go through this exercise. And even for existing trusted flaggers, maybe it will be useful, it creates value, because we are going to, with them, maybe revisit how they are being financed. Is it stable? How do they operate? If they receive financing from the platform, does it interfere with their independence? As a media regulator, we are convinced that you can receive money from a platform while keeping your independence. That's what we do, by the way, with a public broadcaster, which are financed by the government, but we are making sure they are independent from the government. It's one of the regulatory services that we are delivering as a media regulator. So that's a second stage. And it's also important maybe to have the discussion with the government, because at some point we suspect that the government will be part of the scheme, is playing a role, will play a role in financing. On what basis? I guess also they are interested to receive information, not on individual contents, but if they finance the trusted flaggers, maybe they are interested to get aggregate statistics, which makes sense, because at the end of the day, the DSA is not transferring all issues which exist in the online environment to independent regulators. Such a thing will not work. We need independent regulators. We also need government involvement, because if you are fighting online harassment, the question is how do you act with the platform, getting greater accountability, but then you have to act within the school system. And that's where the government can do things. So we also have to build a new relationship with the government as independent regulators by discussing how do we collectively support the trusted flaggers and how do we take the maximum value both on the regulatory side and on the government side. So there's plenty. We are going through a learning curve, and as we every month I realize we have a better understanding of where can we add value, and we are getting ready to move forward. But it may take some time, but we think it's a good investment. It's really year 1 of the DSA, where we are starting to operate with this very modern framework, which is very evolutive and have the capacity to adapt to new threats that we are going to face in moving forward.
I completely agree with that last point. I think as much as it would be nice to have everything in place for that implementation deadline, it's much better for us to do it with thought and do it with collective effort and to do it with understanding rather than to try and meet the deadline as it currently stands.
Is it a deadline?
Well, deadline I think is a light term.
For us, it's year one of the DSA.
Yes.
It's a starting point more than a deadline because we're convinced that every year we'll have higher ambition and build more, tackle more complex issues. So, because, deadline with, no, I prefer year one of the DSA.
I think starting point, actually. Starting point for everything to kick off.
I'm going to tell that to the Google team.
And I'll relay that
Don't
to the
tell it to
network.
Miriam.
We get questions every week about if the deadline will be met. I think with that, actually, Daniela, could you speak from the bird's eye view of the different statuses of implementation around the EU and how an organization as international as Google is going to deal with the varying timeframes that you will have to meet?
Sure. So yeah, Google at this point is actively engaging with DSCs that are being nominated as and when they reach out to Google. I mean, you know, we've spoken to Benoit before. We've been speaking to other digital services coordinators. Given that Google has been working on these types of programs for some time, there's been questions around what sorts of eligibility criteria should DSCs be looking at, and we've been giving that feedback when it's wanted. At this point, I'm not aware that any trusted flaggers have been nominated, though the application forms have been released from certain digital services coordinators. And yeah, so in the meantime, we're trying to prepare as much as possible and ensure that we're up to date on the latest there. But I think, as Benoit said, there's still a long way to go before all trusted flaggers are nominated.
Yeah, I think we've got a long road ahead of us for ironing out what this process looks like. On the InHope end, we are currently engaging in a mapping activity of trying to understand what the maturity is for implementation around the EU and to support member hotlines in all of the countries to meet with their digital services coordinators, to work with the industry partners they have nationally, so this can be done collectively and understood collectively. We are seeing about 2/3 of member states who have identified the digital services coordinators and a couple who have published the guidelines for applying for trusted flagger status and are eagerly awaiting further publications of these applications. But we don't have the working timeline in place as of yet, but we are all currently preparing for it. And so, Daniela, if you could elaborate a little more on how Google is proactively preparing for the Trusted Flagger program to roll out.
Absolutely. So for Trusted Flaggers, there's three main actions that we've taken so far. Article 22 requires that we have, or actually the DSA requires that we have a DSA point of contact. And so we've done up a new help center on top of the existing illegal content help center that we already had that has been in existence for many years for anyone to submit an illegal content request. We have the DSA PRC help center, which is where trusted flaggers will be able to go and see all of the web forms where they can submit illegal content requests and where they'll receive prioritization. Similarly, internally, we've been setting up all of our illegal content processing teams to be able to prioritize requests from trusted flaggers. We've had to alter our tracking, tools in order to meet the DSA requirements, and we're also prepared to report on the quality of DSA trusted flaggers. And then finally, what I've been working a bit more on is the onboarding and learning website we set up. So this will be accessible to any nominated trusted flagger, and it's a website with videos, one-pagers, FAQs to really help DSA trusted flaggers understand which web form to use, what is in scope, what's the difference between a priority flagger program and a trusted flagger program, or reviewer wellness principles that may be useful for trusted flaggers in the future. Really trying to make it as easy and clear as possible for trusted flaggers to submit a request and it be successful the first time.
And are you building off of any learnings from your priority flagging program prior to the DSA that's informing these actions you're taking?
Sure. So I think that learning and onboarding program is on the basis of our experience with priority flaggers, in that we can have a kind of initial onboarding session with the priority flagger, but then they submit requests and for removal, and we have to push back and they don't understand why, and then we have a partnerships team who eventually might need to step in, but there's a lot of back and forth and frustration on both sides, especially when the content, it may be urgent to take down. Very often, the content that's being sent to us needs to be removed quickly, and so we want to speed up that process. We want to try and remove, it'll be very difficult to remove the hiccups that will inevitably happen when DSA trusted flaggers are awarded that status and start submitting requests to us. But we want to try and speed it up. So have really robust training programs so that they can understand how to submit requests, at quality. And similarly, under the DSA, we're actually required to notify digital services coordinators if the quality is consistently not up to par. And so we want to be working with trusted flaggers. We don't want, a system where they're penalized for not understanding our processes correctly. And similarly, we think it's an amazing opportunity to learn from trusted flaggers, maybe adjust our policies. And so this kind of onboarding program that we have, which will have both online resources and some in-person resources, we hope to use that to maximize the value of Article 22.
Fantastic. And then Benoit, you've elaborated quite a bit on how you're preparing for the financial questions around trusted flagging and working with the stakeholders in France. Are there any other proactive measures you're taking while you wait for the legislation to come into play and for the finalization of the processes?
Well, I guess that comments that I receive very often when I participate in meetings to explain the DSA, the role we are going to play, is the fact that some people will tell me DSA is vague or it's not clear. And I see that people are putting different readings in some cases on the same articles. And it's interesting because from our point of view, that was done on purpose by the co-legislator to make sure that we are designing a framework that is not too precise in addressing the issue we were facing yesterday, but that will be agile enough to adapt to the issue we are going to face tomorrow and to issue we don't know yet. And the example I'm giving typically is not directly on trusted flaggers, but it's saying, today we know that our society will collapse because of generative AI. But when the DSA was negotiated, we were not aware yet that generative AI was so powerful. So you don't have generative AI anywhere in the DSA. But when you read again the DSA, we see we have the right level of flexibility to use the DSA with new issues which will derive from generative AI. So yes, we'll have deepfakes more and more with generative AIs, but the tools we have are useful, are flexible enough. So that's something which is very important, but it needs that we have to use this room of maneuver to build a shared vision of how do we want to operate, how do we want to use this framework to create value with existing trusted flaggers. So one idea maybe is that we realized the potential, but we thought that there was also concern that there was not enough transparency. Because, yes, trusted flaggers were telling somebody, an organization, will have a priority access to the moderation team. If we want to increase it, some people are concerned that maybe they can abuse the signaling power. And we know that some examples have been existed that hinting that some people had this idea. So That's what we are adding. We are adding value by increasing transparency. Transparency on the platform, transparency on the trusted flaggers, transparency on how public authorities are also signaling content. So that's one example where how we can move forward and create more value. Another one is, again, in building, saying, how can we increase the value of trusted flaggers? It means that at some point they will be better known by the public, which is an opportunity and a threat. It's an opportunity if you use it wisely. It's a threat if at the end of the day, people don't understand that trusted flaggers are like the 911 in the US or the 112 emergency number in the EU. You call it when you have a real emergency. You don't call it just to say the weather is bad. So clearly here we have to make sure we have this understanding with the political authorities who have the capacity to make it much more, to increase drastically the visibility of trusted flaggers. But if we don't do it with a shared vision, we can have nasty side effects and get just the trusted flaggers to be to collapse because they have less. They don't have the power of the platform, the technical skills of the platform. So they should not be handling the general signaling, which is handled by the platforms. So how do we build this shared vision? If we have that, then we can imagine saying, okay, how can we help them be more, have a grassroots basis and develop networks locally in the territories of each member state with this understanding, saying, okay, this is the 911, the 112 of the internet. There's plenty of issues where we can go on those bases and create, and then also attract more support for trusted flaggers. Support meaning also financing. Sorry, to be very pragmatic.
It's one of the more important points. And I think your point to the text of the DSA and the qualms that people have expressed about it being vague, I think your point about it needing to be suitable for years to come, especially with the rapidly evolving tech that we're all having to deal with and legislate for, I think you are correct, especially for changing trends and changing tides in technology, as well as creating a text that's relevant for 20-odd jurisdictions and legal frameworks, and that needs to be a certain degree of vague and broad to allow for interpretation in the different contexts we're operating in. So I think with our remaining time, let's project a little bit to the future of what will successful implementation of Article 22 look like for you in your context? And can you identify any immediate barriers to this success? Daniela, if we could start with you.
Sure. So I think actually, as you said, Article 22 and the DSA, it's higher level so that there can be. I'm looking forward to DSC's kind of figuring out what makes the most sense to meet the spirit of the law. One thing that again, looking at the very practicality of intaking requests from trusted flaggers that we did have concerns about was the potential for technical abuse. So as far as I understand Article 22 right now, it says that all trusted flaggers, once awarded their status, will be posted up on the names, contact emails, and addresses will be posted up on a publicly accessible website. And that will be, I guess, for the purpose of this 911, can call trusted flaggers when needed. One concern we did have, and we've seen this in our copyright priority flagger program, is the possibility of impersonators. So folks seeing this website and saying, I'll be able to get content removed quickly and potentially with a bit more authority if I impersonate X trusted flagger. And so my team, or some engineers at Google, put together some recommendations, though I think these are very basic technical recommendations that we've been sharing with some DSCs on ways that we could prevent this, including having the names of trusted flaggers on a separate password-protected website that online platforms can access with different contact emails to contact the online platforms with, so that online platforms know who the actual trusted flaggers are. Another way would be to have those email addresses, either on a separate website, or emailed to platforms weekly. Again, we're not really sure how regularly new trusted flagger names will come up, but yeah, having that updated in accordance with the most up-to-date list, either with the new trusted flaggers or I guess at some point trusted flaggers will be removed from the program if their quality is low. So just having that regularly updated to prevent abuse like impersonation, but also revealing of PII, of trusted flagger email addresses. We want to prevent that. Prevention of spam, of trusted flaggers. So that's just one thing that, I think will come out over time. And then I'm not sure where we are on time, but to mention one other thing, I think it'll be important to limit the number of trusted flaggers. Obviously, we want the most expert entities in each country to become trusted flaggers, but particularly when it comes to IP, it could be that we have many trusted flaggers if each individual company who wants to submit copyright or trademark requests became a trusted flagger. And so we'd recommend nominating, I think this is in accordance with Recital 61 as well, a limited number of trusted flaggers who represent many. So for example, industry associations rather than individual companies. And that would prevent both, or allow for both representation of collective interests and objectivity, but also prevent, honestly, clogging up queues, kind of the mantra of if everything's urgent, nothing's urgent. So yeah, I think those would help Article 22 to be successful.
Very constructive advice. Benoit?
This is exactly, I guess, the same kind of discussion. Last week I was in another conference with INCYBER, which is a trade body representing all the holders of industrial property rights in France, especially the luxury industry. And we are having that discussion where we recognize the importance, of course, but first, it's a different story from protecting individual trusted flagger like the In-Hope network and trusted flagger to protect intellectual property. Protecting intellectual property, it's really industrial. When you look at the huge database of the Commission with a statement of reason, where you have 9 billions in less than a year, statement of objection, the bulk of it, as I understand, come from IP, take down for IP reasons. So clearly it's different family. And maybe we have to really use the DSA for what it is. It's a framework to organize a better governance. So a trade union like INCYBER maybe will not do individual signaling, but there may be trusted flaggers of level 2 in a way where they will tell us we are working with our members and we are saying that this platform is no longer acting, or that the performance of this platform suddenly went down. This is critical. If we manage to do that, we will be implementing the DSA and we will be creating value. That's one possibility that we have. And another one I would like to stress, which is a risk in that case, and we have stressed it to some platforms, is if they reinvent trusted flaggers behind the trusted flaggers. If you look at the DSA, you could say, oh, trusted flaggers are only signaling illegal content. But in real life, we know that it's not correct. They are signaling illegal content or content which are against the community rules. And we know that the bulk of the contents which are taken down under community rules. So clearly we're saying the philosophy of the DSA is not that you should recreate with a new name trusted flaggers to do the same thing, which will not be in the framework of the DSA. Or I suspect we will be missing something. So clearly we want to have this dialogue with the biggest platform and saying the DSA is creating a governance, a trusted party, a VLOPS, and somebody with supervision to shed light and to make sure that everybody understands what's taking place, that the dialogue is taking place between those groups on the platform. And we don't think we will be achieving that if we have two systems, one official and another one on the parallel basis dealing with other signaling.
Completely agree on that last point. I think ensuring there's no duplication of effort while acknowledging the different processes in play is going to be very, very important for ensuring success, and especially on the INHOPE end as a global organization who will be operating within the framework of this EU regulation. It is the question of, given the transnational nature of illegal content, how are we going to ensure global cooperation alongside the implementation of this EU framework, and how to best navigate the complexities that come with, while the onus does need to be on the National Digital Services Coordinator to establish the guidelines, rules, and procedures for this, how do we ensure there can be effective cooperation internationally between the digital services coordinators sharing practices on the guidelines established, and for reporting content that has international components, how best to report on this content, where to send it, and how to ensure that there is no need to duplicate the review of the content. There can be information shared effectively between jurisdictions and between inside and outside of the EU with this system in place. And I think there's a lot of pending questions about how we best ensure complementarity with the US system and the other systems that are coming up with the DSA as a guideline for countries like Brazil and other countries who will be implementing similar processes. How do we share the learnings we all have and ensure that content that will affect all of the countries around the world can be best dealt with in one uniform manner with all of these different systems being established? And so I think that is my final note to end on. Any final thoughts from either of you? Otherwise,
if I can just continue with what you said,
please.
because I can mention that as ARCOM, with our Irish colleague from Commission Naman, we are the first two digital service coordinators from the EU joining the GOSREN, the Global Online Service Regulatory Network, which was created by Ofcom on the Australian regulator, and it's not part of the Commonwealth. We have the Irish and the French, so you can join, because all the other members are Commonwealth members, I suspect. But it's this idea that we know the DSA is a very good framework, but the world is still global, and we do have to establish links beyond the EU, and we'll be happy to work with Google, with whatever programs they give to whatever names they give to their program outside of the EU, because at the end we still need to have it, and it's we won't have a legal framework, but we know that regulation is also about establishing institutional capacity. That's what regulators have, with a legitimacy. And in most cases, especially on those issues, legitimacy is sufficient. You know, you don't need political legal enforcement to create a lot of value, and we have a huge room to work on that basis, and we are going to use it, especially when we work on a higher scale than just the EU on a global basis.
I think with that, we are over time. I'll defer to our leaders if there are any audience questions.
Right on time. You're right on time. So thank you so much for the panelists. And thank you for this amazing conversation, which I know will continue surely over the next couple of years, couple of months, to see how it all works out with the DSA and trusted flaggers. So please take an applause for the great panel.